Jeffrey Epstein's story starts like a rumor and ends like a question. He moved through schools, banks, penthouses, and prisons. He turned introductions into influence and influence into silence. To understand how he got there and why it ended the way it did, you have to start before the airplanes, before the island, before the cameras at the jail. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in a working-class family. He played piano, did well at math, and learned fast, especially how to read people. After high school, he attended college but never finished a degree. He didn't need the diploma. He needed the door. His first big door was teaching math and physics at a prestigious Manhattan prep school. He wasn't a typical teacher. He cultivated charisma, confidence, and the habit of noticing who had money, power, and curiosity. Parents talked. One of those parents worked at an investment bank. A conversation became an interview. The classroom became a launch pad. He joined Bear Stearns. He learned the rhythms of risk and reward, how to speak the language of wealthy clients, how to sell certainty in an uncertain market. He rose quickly. He also left quickly, after questions around a trade and whether he'd overstepped the rules. Officially, he moved on. Unofficially, he had learned the most important thing. Money is a network, not a number. He became a financial consultant, then a money manager, then a private investment advisor for people who didn't ask to see resumes. He cultivated mystery. He only took clients above a certain wealth level. He didn't advertise, he didn't explain. He built an image where secrecy signaled status. If you knew him, you must belong. The properties multiplied. A mansion in Palm Beach. A townhouse in Manhattan so big it felt like a museum. A Gulfstream jet with a distinctive tail number. A private island in the Caribbean. Each location wasn't just a home, it was a stage. People were invited, photographed, impressed. Some were recruited, some were targeted. The line between guest and victim blurred behind closed doors. He surrounded himself with power. Bankers, scientists, politicians, royals, academics, celebrities. He made introductions that made people feel important. He remembered birthdays. He funded projects. He promised opportunities. He offered flights. Private, comfortable, off the record. The more people he met, the less anyone asked what he actually did. In Palm Beach, the first criminal case took shape. Parents complained. A detective listened. A pattern appeared. Girls recruited by other girls, promised easy cash to massage, pressured to return, pressured to bring friends. The allegations described a machine, one that funneled vulnerable teenagers into private rooms where consent was replaced by coercion, where power was used like a weight. Local police gathered statements, phone records, message pads with names and times. The case crossed desks and jurisdictions. The FBI looked. The U.S. Attorney's Office looked. And then the outcome shocked anyone who had read the files. A plea deal. Instead of a sweeping federal prosecution, he pleaded guilty to state charges in Florida for soliciting prostitution from a minor. The punishment included a county jail sentence with work release. He left the facility most days to spend hours in an office. Victims asked how this could be justice. Their voices were filed, then sidelined. The Non-Prosecution Agreement, the NPA, promised that federal authorities would not pursue certain charges if he pleaded to the state counts. It was negotiated in a way that kept many victims in the dark. Years later, a judge would rule that federal prosecutors had violated the law by failing to inform victims about the deal. But by then, the deal had been done. He registered as a sex offender and appeared to move on. He returned to New York. The circles of influence didn't close, they shifted. Some distanced themselves. Others returned to the dinners, the donations, the grants. He funded institutes, talked about science, surrounded himself with the language of progress. The past kept pace in whispers, lawsuits, and investigative articles. The pattern of recruitment allegations persisted. A partner who smoothed introductions, a script that repeated, a machine that tried to hide in plain sight. Reporters kept pulling the thread. Civil suits alleged trafficking, abuse, and a network that ran through homes, jets, and the island, Little St. James. Plaintiffs described flights where the destination wasn't a city. It was expectation. They named associates. They diagrammed how girls were found, paid, pressured, and trapped. Some accounts were disputed. Some were corroborated by travel logs, photos, and testimony. The picture sharpened. In 2019, federal prosecutors in New York unsealed an indictment: sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. Agents arrested him at an airport after his jet landed. The case was not a repeat. It was broader. It alleged a ring that operated for years, with assistants and recruiters and rules. The indictment carried real weight and real time. He was sent to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, the MCC Cell 10 on 9 South. A high-security unit, often used for defendants in federal cases with serious charges. Inside, life narrowed to routine. Wake-ups, head counts, trays, interviews with lawyers, time alone with walls that didn't blink. His legal team asked for bail, home confinement, a bond secured by his properties, private guards. Prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with resources and passports. The judge agreed with the government. No bail. He would wait for trial inside. Weeks before the end, something happened in that cell block. An incident that left him on the floor with marks on his neck. Officials investigated whether it was a suicide attempt or an assault. He was placed on watch, then taken off. The cameras in the unit were aging. The staffing was thin. The rules depended on people following them. On an August night, he was moved back into cell 10. A cellmate had been transferred out. Guards were supposed to check on him at regular intervals. According to later court filings, those checks didn't happen when they should have. The cameras on the tier outside the cell had problems. The system that promised accountability offered questions instead. He was found unresponsive in his cell. Attempts to revive him failed. He was transported to a hospital and pronounced dead. The city's medical examiner ruled the death a suicide by hanging. His legal team disputed that conclusion and requested an independent review. A second pathologist hired by the family highlighted fractures that he argued were more consistent with homicide than suicide. Others countered that such fractures can occur in suicidal hangings, especially in older individuals. The jail became part of the story. Overworked officers, falsified logs, cameras that didn't capture what they should have captured, a facility with a record of failures. 2 guards later admitted to lying on forms about required checks that they never performed. Charges against them were eventually dropped after they completed community service and agreed to cooperate with an investigation. The Attorney General promised answers. Conspiracy theories outpaced the pace of the case. Attention swung back to the island. Search warrants, boxes carried up the dock. A painting taken from a wall. Computers seized. The place that once hosted parties became a crime scene under the sun. The patterns prosecutors described: recruitment, grooming, abuse, moved from allegation to evidence as files and testimony accumulated. Investigators focused on the woman described by multiple accusers as his close associate and enabler. Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in 2020. Prosecutors accused her of recruiting and grooming girls, normalizing abuse, and managing logistics that made the machine efficient. In federal court, she was convicted on multiple counts related to the trafficking scheme, and later sentenced to a lengthy prison term. She appealed. Her conviction and the broader narrative cemented that the story was not about a man alone, but a system of people and pressures. The network mattered. Wealth and secrecy created a closed circuit. Private planes, private parties, private islands, private introductions. People who were invited felt vetted. People who left felt trapped. The same names appeared in address books and flight logs, not because attendance equals guilt, but because proximity created the illusion of safety. In the gaps, the machine operated. Victims stood and described what had happened to them, how they were recruited at vulnerable moments, how favors turned into debts, how private rooms closed like lids. Their accounts detailed coercion and the lasting damage of being reduced to a secret. They asked the court to recognize that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was a design. Even today, two stories compete. One says that a powerful abuser died by suicide in a crumbling jail, whose failures masked an ending as chaotic as his life. The other says that too many powerful people had too much to lose, and that the truth about his death is still hidden. The official finding remains suicide. The disbelief remains persistent. It's tempting to look for a single turning point, one decision that took a teacher and turned him into a financier who turned into a trafficker. But his life reads more like a series of choices that rewarded secrecy. Leave the classroom for a bank. Leave the bank for a private office. Leave the office for a jet. Leave the jet for an island. Each step invited fewer questions and offered more doors. What did he actually do for his richest clients? He said he managed money for billionaires. Some believed him. Some doubted anyone ever handed him that much to invest. The secrecy became part of the brand. There were stories about blackmail and compromise, about tapes and safes and favors. Some claims were never substantiated. Others were supported by evidence in court. But even the rumors had gravity. People adjusted their distance based on what they feared might be true. After his 2019 arrest, agents found cash, a fake passport, and valuables in his Manhattan mansion. Prosecutors used that to argue he planned for sudden exits and had the means to disappear. The defense said the passport was an old holdover, from a period in which he claimed to need it for travel. Judges weigh credibility with what's in front of them. In this case, the evidence looked like preparation for anything. Why did it take so long? Victims had spoken. Reporters had written, lawsuits had been filed. Part of the answer is the difficulty of these cases. Victims were young and vulnerable, witnesses afraid or compromised, jurisdictions split across states and islands. Another part is the shield of influence. Doors opened to him that closed to questions. The same charm that won donors and dinner guests convinced others that the whispers were envy, exaggeration, or old news. Until they weren't. After his death, the criminal case ended because the defendant was gone, but the civil cases multiplied. Settlements were reached. Names surfaced in depositions. Documents were unsealed. Some connections were clarified, others stayed muddy. The picture that emerged was brutal in its simplicity. A man with money and access exploited his position to abuse girls, and a web of people and institutions failed to stop him for years. His death didn't end the story, it atomized it. Some people argue over the cause. Others ask why a jail that held terrorists and mob bosses couldn't prevent a high-profile defendant from dying in custody. Reformers use the case, to demand change in detention standards. Lawyers pursue remaining claims. Victims ask for recognition that the system was not built to protect them, but it can be forced to. You can study his assets, his companies, and his contacts. You can map the flights and the parties. You can read depositions and rulings. But the thing that keeps this story burning is not the money or the mystery. It's the failure of accountability in real time. When victims spoke, they weren't heard enough. When officials had chances, too many took the easy exit. The outrage is earned. Jeffrey Epstein sold the idea that proximity to him meant proximity to power. For years, it worked. It worked until the machine that protected him stalled, until the cases stacked high enough to be undeniable, until the jail door finally closed. He left behind properties, lawsuits, and questions that will take years to answer. He also left behind testimony. Voices that changed the record from rumor to record. From a Brooklyn classroom to a private jet, from a townhouse full of secrets to cell 10, Jeffrey Epstein's life was built on doors that only opened from the inside. When the Tycoon fordeur, like to sequences, sir. Marsley closed, it was too late to fix what he had already broken.